All right, without further ado, welcome to Startup Grind Chilliwack. Well, as you know, well, maybe you don't know, it's our end of the year celebration, end of decade celebration. So this is the last Startup Grind Chilliwack for this entire decade. So thanks for coming out. Startup Grind is all about educating, inspiring, and connecting. And there are more than 600 chapters now around the world. And if you are interested, there's a global conference happening in February, and we've actually got 4 people going from Chilliwack. Rumor has it there might be 1 or 2 more beds in the Airbnb, so hit me up. Our values: make friends, give first, help others. And really, that's what it's all about. We're building a tech and innovation ecosystem in the Upper Fraser Valley, and you guys are all part of it. We've had wonderful sponsors this year: SEPCO, Chilliwack Economic Partners, Accelerator, and the University of the Fraser Valley. Let's hear it for those guys. And our partners, those that are putting it on: Cowork Chilliwack, Currency Marketing, Wisebox, and Around Chilliwack. Woohoo! And it's our first year. We've actually done 12 talks in the last year, which is fantastic. I've really enjoyed it myself, getting to know all of these people and surface their story, and it's been just fantastic. And thanks so much for supporting it. If you are hashtagging, use Startup Grind and post your imagery and so forth to social networks. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to announce our guest this month, Kurt Shuster. He's the CEO and co-founder of Theravue. So everyone on your feet, and let's give a warm Startup Grind welcome to Kurt. Come on up. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming out from Vancouver. Really appreciate it. Okay, I just have to cut right to the chase.
Sure.
With your AI experience and delving into this for more than 2 decades, is it going to be a hopeful future or the Terminator future?
I'm preparing for the robot revolution myself.
Okay, so you're in the Elon Musk camp of that we don't know what these things are going to actually do.
We definitely don't know what they're going to do. They might be totally benign and keep us as pets, or they might kill us all.
Oh, fair enough.
I'm still trying to figure out which one would be better.
But having said that, over that 20-year span, obviously it's changed a lot, and we've seen AI part of everything now, and it seems like a lot of it's coming up in what's being served to us in social networks and so forth. But talk about that span of time and what's gone on.
Well, I'm definitely not an AI expert, although I did sort of start in AI.
Okay.
So I'm, I don't want to present myself as having more knowledge than probably people who are still working in the field. But I'm actually a little bit more optimistic, I would say, than perhaps some people, mainly because I think that, first of all, AI is really tough. I actually was in AI for the start of my career. I worked at Electronic Arts,
right,
building AI for their sports games. And I kind of got out of it because it just didn't seem like it was getting very far very quickly. It's actually really hard to do AI. And the good news is that it's still really hard to do AI. No one's really close, as far as I can tell, to general AI, the kind of Terminator type of future that we see in movies. So probably it's going to be a long time before we have to be worried, I suspect. And in the meantime, there's starting to be a lot of interest in neural networks and other things that are actually going to do things that probably aren't going to kill us, but probably improve our lives a lot. So I'm kind of excited, let's say, for the next decade or 2.
Well, that was a non sequitur right off the bat, but you did touch on some of your early career. I know that you initially went for a psychology degree at UVic.
Yes.
And then once you moved from there, you took a computer science. And talk to me about that experience and the linkage between those 2 degrees.
Well, I actually kind of, it was fairly intentional. I wanted to work in AI, since I was really when I was young and I first heard about it, I thought it was a really cool idea that you could build, these intelligent machines. And so it was fairly intentional to start in psychology. I got a degree in that at UVic, and then I got another degree in computer science because I wanted to know how computers work. I wanted to know how human brains worked, so I could make a computer that worked like a human brain. That was pretty well the goal all along.
And so your initial interest in computers and AI, when did that start? Were you a teenager and you got a PC or?
I think I watched like a Discovery Channel documentary on neural networks or something.
Okay.
At age 15. And it just seemed really cool to me. Thought, wow, that sounds like the future. And when I, learned a little bit more about psychology and realized it's, for a lot of people, it doesn't seem like there's much connection between psychology and computer science. And
right.
you actually like do a degree in psychology. The kind of people there are completely different than the kind of people who go into computer science. And they do seem very superficially different, but your brain really is just a computer made out of meat. And that's it. It's doing computing. It's a computational device. And so when you kind of think of it that way, they seem a lot more connected than they might otherwise.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so was there any particular reason to go to UVic other than it's a great school and you were drawn to it?
Yeah, I mean, I got in, maybe.
Okay, fair enough.
That's why I went there. I had been to UBC before that, and I was in engineering, and I didn't do so well. I was straight out of high school, and I thought, being an adult was all about staying up late, drinking beer, and missing class. And turns out that's not a really good way to pass your course. So I kind of went through that phase a little bit, and once I got myself straightened up, I decided, okay, I'm going to take my education seriously, and then I went to UVic.
Cool. Coming out of UVic, you've got 2 degrees, but your computer science degree you put to work and got a job at EA.
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, the interest I had was in artificial intelligence. Now today, AI is like huge. You hear about it all the time, but back then there weren't a lot of places you could actually apply it. So my only options were to, go do a PhD somewhere and, be an academic. That didn't appeal to me because I wanted to build stuff. I'm a builder,
right.
I'm an engineer at heart. And really the only place realistically to build something and use AI that time was in video games.
And were you a video gamer? Like, was that something you were into, or just this was an outlet to do your craft?
Yeah, I was probably the only one to work at EA that wasn't really inherently a video gamer. So I was amongst a lot of other people who really loved video games, and I was, casual gamer, I suppose, but my real interest was in AI and building intelligent machines.
And the culture in a gaming company is these massive deadlines, and you work 24/7. And
I'm told it's better now. I have friends who are still in the industry. I remember at the time there was this famous lawsuit that came out where I might not have the details exactly right, but the spouses of people who worked in the gaming industry were suing Electronic Arts because they weren't seeing their spouse ever.
Wow.
And I remember being there, and I didn't have a spouse, but I thought, yeah, I can kind of appreciate that. It was the sort of thing where you would work pretty well every day. When I first started out of university, I literally worked almost every day, including weekends, for about 3 months.
Wow.
I got a couple weekends off, one to go to a wedding, and that's just how it was back then.
Yeah.
So I realized I wasn't particularly that keen on being in the video game industry because I didn't love video games. So I eventually left and went to another place in Boston that just focused on AI.
During your time in Electronic Arts, it sounds like a grind, honestly, but were there any takeaways like that you learned and apply today, or was that just a chapter that was, let's get rid of it and move on?
Well, actually, I would say the lesson that's probably relevant to your audience is, you have to work really hard no matter what. If you're going to work for somebody else, if you're going to work for yourself, and I worked really hard, everybody did. And I realized, why would I want to work that hard for somebody else when I can work that hard for myself? That's probably the first time I got the idea that at some point I'd like to start my own thing.
Got it. So you moved from there to a firm in Boston.
Yep.
And was it around government contracts and scientific research and so forth. Tell me about that experience.
It was really great. So the company I worked for did R&D for mostly government agencies, so NASA, Department of Defense,
Hmm.
Department of Energy, that kind of thing. And it was really cool because there were just so many different projects. It was a lot of stuff that was very kind of like innovative, cutting edge, like just kind of ideas. Like, here's an idea, here's a problem. Let's see if we can apply AI tool X to solving that problem.
So, as a Canadian working in the U.S., were you sponsored by that company to come, or how did that work?
I was on a TN visa.
Okay,
Yeah.
so a treaty NAFTA visa allowed you to work in the U.S.
Yeah.
How does that jive with, like, it sounds like pretty high tech, high security stuff. Were you like a lot of security clearance that you had to go through, or?
Yeah, sometimes. So, for example, when I was in California to do a demo for a project at NASA, this was, I think, about a month after 9/11 happened. And I literally couldn't get in to the demo. So they said at that point, they're like, no foreigners are allowed on our, military or NASA campuses. So, that guy can't come.
Wow.
And, I was pretty well the only person who'd actually worked on this project. So my boss said, he can't come. We can't give you the demo. So we ended up doing it in my hotel room off campus at NASA. It was called Ames. So this big kind of research laboratory. That was a bit of a problem. I think just because of the timing of that event.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
How did the demo go in the hotel room?
Oh, it was good. Yeah, it went really well.
Good.
We were using something called mobile agents, which at the time seemed like this great new, about to take over the world AI technology. But it, anyone who's interested can Google it. But I don't think anyone's using mobile agents anymore.
And so that period of time, a couple years, I think you were in Boston.
Yeah.
And then what was the next chapter?
Then I decided I wanted to go do an MBA. So I went to England.
Because 2 or 3 degrees weren't enough?
Yeah, no, I definitely was a perpetual student for a period of my life. The reason to do my MBA was because I knew by that point I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to start a company. I incorrectly believed that the way to do that was to learn how to run a business. And I figured, well, an MBA is probably a good way.
Yeah, because the typical playbook these days is to quit school and just start a startup.
Yeah, I wasn't really doing it probably the way I should have. The reason I went to Cambridge in the UK, which is sort of a bit like the Silicon Valley of Europe, really.
Right.
It's kind of where a lot of startups and things are. So I went there for that reason, and I kind of went to all the startup events, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs there and VCs and people who were putting on talks and events like this one.
Yeah.
All about how to start a company and, how to be a tech entrepreneur. And I went to all of them and I asked people, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to make my own thing. What advice do you have? And they always looked at me funny, like, what are you doing here? Like, my advice is to quit your MBA like tomorrow. And if you want to learn how to start a company, don't take an MBA, just start a company, do it.
Did you take their advice, or did you?
I did finish.
You did finish. Okay.
It was only a 1-year program, so it wasn't that much extra time. But I finished the program, and I did in fact start my company pretty well right after.
And were you percolating ideas for that company while you were in school, or did you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I get like 30 new ideas every day, so that wasn't a problem. It was pretty well figuring out which one to do.
How did you figure out which one to do?
So my first company was called New Me, and it was essentially I had gone to a life coach because it was a new thing back then.
I actually have a homepage screen grab of New Me.
Oh, okay.
Since we're going to talk about that, and this is today, so this is probably
it's totally different.
Yeah,
like all good startups, it's pivoted 3 times at least since we started. Originally, so when I went to this life coach, it was great. I learned all these great things about figuring out your future and coming up with a plan and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of it involved these worksheets and these pieces of paper she would give me as homework to fill out, like, what do you dream about and what are you good at and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of had this idea that you don't need a human for this. You can just kind of automate this. What I think a lot of tech entrepreneurs do. They think, okay, this is something happening in meat space. Let's put it online. So my idea was, let's automate this. Let's kind of create this robotic coaching website. And back then, that was when people were still using the phrase Web 2.0. So
what era? Like 2005, 2006, earlier?
yeah, we actually started in 2007. So
Okay.
This is just after I finished my MBA.
So to paint the picture in that realm, you've got Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are pretty new in the consumer space, and it's all kind of happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was like, the first wave of web startups were kind of like late 90s. And this is when, after the original crash happened in early 2000s, this is kind of the next wave that started, the Web 2.0 era, I guess. And the idea was to build this sort of robotic life coach that you could, engage with through your computer and figure out your life and achieve your dreams and all that good stuff by replacing an actual human life coach.
Got it. And so was this just you in your apartment, or did you form a company with a partner and get investment? What was the early days of Numi like?
So I started with a couple people. One of my friends who also lived in England, and then another friend who was, someone I knew from back in Vancouver, who in fact was a life coach. And I kind of started talking to him about this idea I had, and he said, "Oh, I'm a life coach. Why don't we kind of join up?" We got a little bit of seed capital from a couple of angel investors that we knew sort of through our network, and actually hired a company, believe it or not, in India
Okay.
to do the software, to write the code.
Now, you being someone with a technical background, I imagine that made that a little easier, or
Yeah, I mean, at least I because I was a programmer, I'm really not anymore. I
got it.
honestly couldn't write a hello world program today to save my life. But at the time, and still to this day, I can at least talk to the programmers. I know, how to speak their language.
Right.
So I was sort of the project manager from this side of the ocean. And that's how we got started.
So is there the reason to do it offshore is obviously it's cheaper, but are there any other benefits to it that you found?
No.
No?
There are probably, and I don't mean this like, I actually really like the team I work with, the programs we had, particularly the manager. His name's Rakesh. I still know him. He's a great guy. That was all great. The problem is that when you outsource, I don't think it's just India. You could outsource to Russia, China, anywhere. There's a bunch of cons and only one pro. There's literally one pro, and it's cheaper. That is the one reason to do it. Everything else is a con because of the time difference. There's a bit of language difference. There's, those aren't even the biggest problem. When you outsource, really the biggest issue is, I think if you had a company, if we knew exactly what we wanted and we had everything specified and specifiable, great. Then you can outsource to India. No problem. Do that. It's going to save you money. Awesome. When you're running a startup, when you're doing something totally new and different, you don't even know what you want until you've built it. You need that rapid iteration.
Right.
You need a group of people in the same office, the same place, the same time, speaking the same language, who can execute and iterate quickly. This is probably obvious to a lot of people. It wasn't obvious to me at the time. It was definitely one of the big learnings. So I definitely wouldn't recommend it if you're going to be starting a software company.
So from that time of coming up with the idea, forming a company, outsourcing, how long did it take to get your first client, customer, free or paid?
It was about a year, maybe a little less. So we actually did eventually hire someone locally here to be our chief software developer. One of the big mistakes I actually made, we'll get to your answer, your question in a second. I did make kind of a classic rookie mistake of trying to do too many things, right? And this was before even people like Eric Ries and others talking about the lean startup, where we now know it's really important to do the absolute minimal, the smallest thing you could possibly do. I didn't know any of this. So we, of course, decided every idea was a good idea. Everything had to be into this giant convoluted mess of a system. So we put everything in there, and of course it didn't work, and there were a lot of bugs and everything. And our chief technology officer when we hired him here. He just had enough. One day he said, "You know what? I'm going to you can submit your website to TechCrunch and just say, hey, here we are." And I was like, "Don't do that." He's like, "Well, I'm going to do it anyway." So he did it anyway. And then we just got this publication on TechCrunch, and all of a sudden, we'd had like 5 or 6 users for that, and then we had like 2,000 overnight.
Wow.
It was crazy. It was really cool. And I didn't feel like we were ready. And I was a little angry at him for doing that, but in hindsight, it was probably the right thing. Probably should have launched sooner, even. And that was our first users, really.
And so those are like those that follow tech and they're signing up for everything. Did you find that they signed up and then they just tailed off, or were they using the product?
A few people did.
Yeah.
But it really was so that the idea morphed a bunch of times. What we were trying to do kept changing. And, I kind of learned the hard way why these principles like MVP and, start small, fail fast are so important. Because we did it all wrong. Right. Any mistake you could make, especially the fact that we just did too many things. So it started to get a little traction, but the users ran into the problems I knew existed, but they existed because we were trying to do too many things.
And what was the model for generating income? Like, was it a paid service or a freemium style?
Yeah, at the time, we didn't have any actual revenue model. It was just like a lot of startups, this idea, if you build it, they will come. And then if they come, we'll monetize somehow, a mysterious way. So it was just a freemium without the premium, just it was free. And we had some ideas of how to do it. But like often happens, the unexpected happened. The unexpected was actual life coaches started using the system. And which is weird because we were trying to put them out of business. That was the whole point. We were trying to get rid of life coaching. And I feel bad even saying that now because I really like life coaching. I like coaches, and I think they do a good service. And one thing we learned was that our software is really trying to replace something that's not replaceable. It's really hard to replace a human. And, Elon Musk found this. When he built his Model 3 factory, and he sort of famously said a few months ago, like, this is when they were going through this whole production hell. He'd built this giant factory with like 8 humans, which was unheard of, like a tiny number. It looked like the inside of a, alien spaceship.
Right.
And then it just didn't work. And then he kind of famously said, "I've undervalued the importance of humans." And that's kind of what we learned. So you can't easily replace a human if it's a sort of dynamic, engaging coaching
So were these
process.
coaches kind of hacking the system to fit their use case, or what were they using it?
Yeah, a little bit. They were pretty well using it as intended, except they kind of put themselves into the system. So that it was meant to replace them because it had a goal setting system and calendar system and a bunch of tools to basically arrange your life and plan out your goals and all this kind of stuff. So they thought these tools are awesome. They're great. So they were using with their clients in a sort of hacky way. And they said, "Look, we'll pay you for this. We'll give you money if you kind of add these features and make it more useful for us." So we pivoted a little bit to make it, rather than replace the coach system, it was a system for coaches to manage their clients.
So this is over a period of time. How did you put food on the table? Like, how did you get through?
Well, we did have a little bit of seed funding.
Yeah.
We also got a lot of, we did all the usual things. There's a surprisingly large amount of government funding available in Canada. If you're willing to put in the effort and time to, write the grant applications, all that kind of stuff. And then we did start to actually get revenue. So once we realized that coaches who we were originally trying to make extinct actually started using the software, we were charging them for the use of it. And then we also figured out a way to monetize what they really wanted, which was actually a way of getting customers. So we once again transitioned into a system. We actually got rid of all the goal setting tools eventually. And now we're pretty well just a system for a marketplace for coaches and clients to match up.
And on that note, like being a Canadian company, there was no restrictions on who could use this software. I imagine that you're getting clients all over North America, around the world.
Yeah, pretty well.
How did you deal with any taxation or local rules? Did you just sort of wing it, or did you figure out how to do that?
every country has different rules and laws and regulations. But they're usually pretty, let's say, lax when it comes to other small companies doing business. So, for example, in California, if you were to sell something, like if we had enough customers in California that our revenue just in the state of California was $1 million, it's some number like that, we would actually have to pay taxes in California, even though we're in Canada. Even though we have no footprint, we have no business there, we have no employees. They've got rules like that. But if you're under that threshold, and I don't know what it is because I know we're way under it, then they don't enforce, or there is no rules. The rule is, you don't have to pay all these. So that seems to be the way it is in most countries. Coaching is such a small niche in general in the world that we do exist in all the countries of the world. We literally have coaches in, I think, almost, not actually every country, but I think most of them today. And yet, it's, they mostly operate under that kind of principle. If you're big enough in their region, you have to pay taxes and jump through the hoops and all that. But
I'm curious on the origin of the Numi name. So it's Numi, but it's spelled in a unique way. Is this just a late night domain search to see what I can actually get?
Yeah, we had a terrible name to start. It original name was paircoach.com.
Okay.
The business name is actually still called Paircoach Enterprises. The reason we had that
Pair
name,
like the fruit, or pair like two
a partner,
people?
because partly what I didn't tell you about our original product was it was intended for you and a friend to work together. You basically coach each other. That was the way it was kind of constructed. So the original name was paircoach.com. We never liked the name, but it just kind of happened. We decided to change the name after a while. We had a slogan, and the slogan of the company was "We is the new me."
Okay.
That was what we thought. That was very clever. And
you're rolling your eyes.
Yeah. But so when it came to find a new name, we thought new me, that sounds kind of cool. Like, it has a sort of connotation of change and growth and all that. Of course, it's really hard to find any domain at all under the sun.
Yeah.
Especially a .com. So we had to find a spelling that was still available. So that's why we're called New Me with two eyes.
Got it. And so you've pivoted a little bit. Now it's pivoted to a marketplace where it's a kind of a matching service.
Yep.
And you stepped away from the company 2-3 years ago now.
Yeah.
But Numi's still going and going strong. You're on the board, I understand. And
yeah. So I handed off to my co-founder. His name's Stefan. He's doing a great job. And it's still growing. We're actually expanding mostly into corporate coaching and coaching on something called psychological safety, which is sort of new, I guess you could call it buzzword, but I think it's more than just a buzzword. It's not a fad. It's this really cool thing in corporate coaching around how do you build teams that trust each other and interact with each other in a way that maximizes their effectiveness. That's what's going on there. So I handed that off to him, and it's still growing. It's still cash flow positive and all that stuff. And then about 4 years ago, we spun out a different company.
Yeah,
that's Theravue.
Got it.
And that's the one that I'm running now.
Here.
Yeah. So. And I've been the CEO of that company for, I guess, 3.5 years now.
And that goes back to you've got 10 new company ideas in your mind. And what struck you with Theravue, and what is it in a nutshell?
So in a nutshell, well, there's the kind of small version and there's a big platform version. The general idea is that it's a system for training humans on interpersonal skills. So the idea is that there are certain interpersonal skills that people don't think they can train. Like you know that you can train yourself to play piano or be better at golf or tennis, right? But you wouldn't think, I'm going to train myself to be better at listening or better communicating with my wife, or being better at being an extrovert if I'm an introvert. These are all interpersonal skills. Turns out that the same way that you would train in tennis or golf or music, those principles of practice and training could actually be applied to training interpersonal skills. So our software basically trains people in interpersonal skills. And the first vertical for that platform is in training counselors, so psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, because the best psychologists in the world have very strong levels, high levels of these interpersonal skills. So if you're really good at things like empathy and listening as a therapist, your clients will get better outcomes and they'll be healthier and happier. So
So
it's
are
a really
these
nice market.
established professionals, or you're teaching them at the university level, or?
Yeah, we sell the system to colleges and universities that train. So if you wanted to be a counselor or a psychiatrist or psychologist, you would go to UBC or something and go into their counseling training program. We sell our software to those programs.
Okay, being a layman, that sounds like a really tough market to sell to.
Oh, it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's in the educational software space. It's got really challenging and very long sales cycles. So I actually wouldn't recommend people doing it now that I've got this experience. If you're trying to sell, let's say, to consumers like B2C, or even just businesses, which is a little harder and has longer sales cycles typically, that's great. It's work. You have to do it. But at least you can sell something and you know that, okay, on this day we have the first meeting, and this day we have a demo. At some point they're going to think about it and buy. With selling to schools, you have this very long sales cycle with very defined dates. Like most schools will start in September. They won't, buy software until the spring sometime. They'll make a decision in that point, and if you miss it, you have to wait a whole year.
And I imagine you're selling to a number of different departments, right? You're selling to the psychology school, and maybe they're super psyched about it, but now they have to talk to infrastructure and IT and how are we going to roll this out? How do you overcome those challenges?
Well, it's I think it's just a matter of doing it. I know that sounds kind of, I don't know, obvious or something, but it's no different than any of the other 12 years that since I started this, and it's always the same thing. There's an infinite number of challenges and things that you run into. So I've kind of changed my thinking about challenges and roadblocks. This is a bit of an abstract answer to your question, but I used to be really upset or just kind of bothered by roadblocks and challenges, and this is like, anybody would, right? Nobody likes challenges. Nobody likes roadblocks and hurdles. But I've changed my thinking on it. I now look at hurdles and roadblocks as a good thing. It's like, that's what gives you the opportunity. If something was easy, if it didn't have roadblocks and challenges, somebody else would have done it.
Yeah,
right?
I suppose that's a defensible mode at some point. You've overcome so many challenges that you've got to lead.
Yeah, and so now I'm actually happy when a challenge happens. And there's a lot of challenges. So right now we're trying to sell this, fairly large organization. They have a lot of like IT requirements and various other legal requirements. And as a smaller software company, it's it's just a lot of work. And there was probably a time when I'd be like, oh, damn it, there's a lot of work. And now I think of it like, you know what? If this is a lot of work and time and effort for me, it's probably a lot of work and time and effort for somebody who might be a competitor. And, I like that it's a lot of time and effort and work. It's a good thing. I don't know if exactly that's answering your question, but
it's okay. I forgot what my question was.
Well, I think you were asking about challenges I'm facing
sure.
right now, and I kind of gave you this general answer around it's a good thing. I like the challenges. I like the roadblocks.
I'm really curious how you tackled pricing. How did you figure out what this product should be worth? Was it a subscription service? Is it a per seat? And what does that discussion look like internally, or spreadsheets, or how do you tackle that?
Pricing's really hard. If you look up pricing theory online, or you can go to, it's like one of the topics in business school, actually. How do you price something? There's different strategies. You can look at your competitors and add 10%. You can say, what does it cost me, and multiply it by 1.5. There's a bunch of ways to do it. When you're doing, I think that the challenge as a tech startup, is that you're by definition building something that did not exist before, right? It's generally not a good idea to start a new software company and build something that directly competes with a big established company. It's just a recipe for failure. So you're stuck with this situation where you're building something that's new. Nobody knows it exists before, and nobody knows what it should be worth, right? So you're trying to figure out, how do you price something? And you could be several orders of magnitude off. I don't know if there's a really good answer to that when you don't have anything to compare it to. In our case, we went through a couple different pricing models. What we settled on was we basically sell it like a textbook.
Okay.
So one of the things we discovered is that the schools are very hesitant to buy software. They don't have the budget. They're very constrained, and they've already bought a bunch of software. It may not exactly do what they want, but they don't have the budget for the extra software. And we're new, so it's not like if you look at how educational software is purchased, usually they'll put out an RFP. They'll say we're looking for software for X. They'll expect 3 or 4 vendors to bid on that. That only works when they're looking for something they already exists. So we're building something totally new. They don't know it exists. They're not looking for it. They're not putting in our RFP. So we discovered we had to sell it to the teachers. We had to do things to get them really excited about it. And they are really excited about it. When we give them a demo, when we show them, they say, this is awesome. This is great. I love it. I have to have it. But I don't have any money. I can't, there's like this 18-month bureaucratic nightmare process for a school, for a teacher to get their school to buy software. So we ended up kind of selling it like a textbook. So if you recall being back in school when you would pay thousands of dollars to be in a course, and then you would have to pay extra for the textbook. We're like another textbook. So we price it, and that actually helped us to figure out what the price should be. There's a certain price. Textbooks are like $100, $150. So our price is $59, so we're a little bit less. And then we have the framing effect, so we can say, hey, we're about half the price of the textbook. That makes people happy. That's how we came up with the price.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that student, are they paying the university then that's paying you, or are they buying this kind of seat while they're in class directly from Theravue, or how does that work?
They're buying straight from us.
Okay.
So we use Stripe. They pull out their credit card. When their teacher invites them to join the software, they get an email, they sign up, and then it asks them to pay with their credit card.
And is it a one-time fee, or is it a subscription model?
It's a subscription. So most courses that use it are 4 months in length, a typical semester length. So they essentially get a subscription for 4 months for $59.
Neat. And the repeatable is that there's a new class next year.
Yeah.
Or next semester.
Yeah, it's a great model. Once you get a teacher, we're finding a very high, repetition, renewal rate.
And are those teachers, I don't want to say needy, but do they require a lot of training? How have you tackled that? Have you created help videos or help center, or is it pretty straightforward to use?
Yeah, my personal sort of policy on that kind of thing is, you buy a new app for $1 or it's free, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone's ever looked up the instructions on an app, right?
Fair enough.
It should be easy enough to use without reading the instructions. That's my personal feeling. A lot of software is not, especially in educational software. It's usually really complex. So we've actually spent a lot of time and effort making it easy enough so that you don't need to read the instruction manual. And right now we don't really have an instruction manual to read, so that's probably a good thing.
Okay.
That's coming. But most of our users find it very easy to use.
And is Theravue a web app, or is it a web app and native app on iOS and Android?
It does work on iOS and Android, but through a browser.
Okay.
So it's a web app at the moment. Yeah.
And have you faced, it sounds like because those students are direct clients, I know a lot of university software, there should be one single log on, and then they've got access to all of their Google instance and so forth. Are you under that umbrella, or is it sort of outside of that?
We're outside of that.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing now is there's this thing called the LTI, which is a way of integrating with their course management software.
Okay.
So there's a couple of big companies that almost all universities use now for all of their online courses, even in their in-person courses. It's all online. This all came after I was a student. So when I was a student, it was still writing things on paper and turning it in, but now everything's digital. There's a couple of big players there, and there's a way for your app to kind of plug into that. So we're not quite ready, but we're almost ready to launch that.
And I guess it's in your best interest to hook into that and just make it easier, right?
Yeah.
So now this journey versus Numi, you're sounds like 3-4 years into this.
Yep.
Did you take your own medicine and do the MVP and get the feedback and iterate? And
Yeah, I would say we're like easily, twice as far in the same amount of time than we were in Numi. I mean, we just made so many bad mistakes with Numi. I mean, just like every mistake you can imagine. So I like to think we've learned a thing or two. We're definitely farther ahead by a lot than we were at this time in the first company.
And you talk about is it entirely an in-house team? You're not doing any outsourcing? And how big is that team?
So the team is 5 people. One of our 5.5, kind of one of our co-founders. He's a very well-known person in the therapy education space. He's the person I originally contacted. His name's Bruce. He's a great guy, and he founded the company with me, essentially. So he's like the half, in addition to the 5 people here in our office.
That's a critical bit, and I don't want to glaze over that. Is you don't necessarily have the industry expertise or the connections, what it takes, and by partnering with somebody with that, I imagine that would be one reason you went for that vertical first. But talk to me about that decision to partner right off the bat.
Yeah, it was a great idea. He's opened up a lot of doors for us. He's very well known in the industry. And he's very much a domain expert. He doesn't come from a software background, so that's sort of my thing, or a business background. But he's like, nobody in the field is more knowledgeable or respected in counseling and interpersonal skills than he is. So that was absolutely, we would never make it to where we have today without that. But my background is a little bit of psychology as well. So,
right.
One of the things I think is really important, as if I were to give advice to an entrepreneur, is to try to, I've seen other people say this, where you don't want to be too narrowly focused on one thing. A lot of tech entrepreneurs typically are, all they know is technology. They could be a genius programmer, but they might not actually know anything else about any other domain. Whereas if you just know kind of a little bit about 2 domains that are different enough that the intersection of those 2 things, you may not be an expert in either one, but you are the one expert in the world in the way those 2 things intersect, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I've always thought about this company, because I'm really interested in psychology. I'm really interested in software technology, and I'm interested in business. So it's sort of combination of all those things that I think is somewhat unique, even though I'm not particularly expert in any of them.
So you've kept it pretty small, a team of 5.5 people. Your overhead, your burn rate, all of these industry jargon is pretty low.
Yeah.
Are you at the point where you're starting to turn a profit, or are you still climbing that hill?
We're still climbing the hill.
Yeah.
We've definitely taken advantage of IRAP and SHRED and all the great government grants. So as a taxpayer, thank you for supporting us.
You're welcome.
And
well, talk to me about IRAP. How did you tap into that, and how do you even know about it? And if I put you on the spot, what does that acronym stand for?
It stands for Industrial Research Assistance Program, I think. I might not be right about the A, but it's essentially a program for getting federal money to do R&D, essentially. And it's great. The thing about these programs is that, we didn't actually take advantage of them as early as we could have, because we just didn't know about them. And it's actually quite unique in Canada. There's a lot more available federally and provincially, for that matter, grants for software and other tech companies than almost any other place in the world.
IRAP representative in Chilliwack. Like, they're all over the place, and they represent this fund, and they're looking for entrepreneurs to invest in. And so did you just go to their website and knock on the door, or how did that come to be?
I went to an event. I forget which event, but somebody was speaking at the event from IRAP.
Okay.
Saying, hey, we have this money available. You should get some of it, because if you don't, someone else will. And it is really that simple. You have to apply for it, and you may or may not get it. There's definitely rules, and it's good that there's rules, because otherwise, I wouldn't feel good as a taxpayer if I knew my money wasn't being spent well and all that. But Um,
And IRAP's not taking equity or anything, are they?
No,
It's
it's
literally a grant.
It's literally a grant. It's a really good program, but it's just one. There's a lot of government programs. There's a lot of support in Canada. The government's clearly trying to improve, our status as a innovation nation. And it's just that so many people don't know about it. They don't think about it. They don't try to do it, or they think, well, I'm really early stage. I'm just, not big enough or whatever. And they don't try to access the programs that are available.
So as CEO of a tech company, that can be a pretty lonely job. What do you do are you involved in any groups that help you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'm I'm in a roundtable.
Okay.
There's a group in Vancouver called Ace Tech, which is absolutely amazing. It's essentially a group of tech CEOs, and they've got many roundtables. So
Right.
our roundtable is about 8 people. It is a lonely job. So when you start a company, if you're all by yourself, it's lonely because you're all alone. But even as you start to grow and you get employees and you start to maybe get revenue and build products, it's lonely in a different way, right? When you work for somebody else, when I worked at EA, we would go hang out and drink beers and do that socializing thing. You could complain about the boss all you wanted and everything was great. When you're the boss, you don't have anyone to complain about the boss to. There's certain things that you're really struggling with. Like, then there are a lot of struggles as a CEO. It's really challenging at times. So a group like Ace Tech, and there's others out there. So this one is particularly good though, because everybody else is kind of in the same boat. So you get to bounce ideas off of another group of people that have had the same challenges, that might have really good suggestions.
What does that look like? Is it a monthly face-to-face meeting or?
Yeah, it's we meet in person. There's other ones. I think there's one called Entrepreneurs Online or something, EO. There's a bunch of them that are global, and there's a ton of them. I think some of them meet virtually through like Skype and Zoom. This one is in person, so we meet once a month. And there's social events and a few other things as well. I like meeting in person. I intentionally made sure that we have an office that's a physical space. Everyone actually is in the same office at the same place and the same time. It might have been, I don't know, a bit of a sort of scar from my days when all of our developers were exactly 12 hours away, the other side of the world. I'm a big believer in people getting together and doing things together and collaborating in person, looking at each other, writing on a whiteboard, everybody being together. Some people don't like that. They'd rather work from home, but that's kind of my preference.
And so physical office, do you have space in Vancouver or what does that look like?
Yeah, we're in a co-working space in Gastown.
I like co-working. That's good.
Yeah. We're in probably the most awesome co-working space I've ever seen.
Nice. Thank you.
In Chilliwack of all places. Very unexpected, but it's really great. Our co-working space in Vancouver is really awesome as well. I highly recommend it. A lot of people, I know it's very common for people to work online from home. There's a lot of digital companies now that don't have an office. Everyone's remote. I don't like that. I think that you miss a lot when you're not interacting socially with other people. I think there's a lot of value in that, personally.
And so the 5 core team members, are they in the office daily or is some remote or?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they work remotely, like there was just a transit strike the other day. So they work from home on those days.
And so you've mentioned there's yourself. What does the rest of this team look like?
So we've got a couple of software engineers. We've got a very talented web designer. We've got a customer support manager, myself, and then our chief scientist. He's in the United States.
And so your role as CEO, you're putting food on the table. Are you doing the sales and marketing as well as running the company?
Yeah, I'm doing all of the things. So like a lot of small companies, when you start a company, you don't realize how many different things there are to do. And now we've hired enough people that I've managed to delegate and reduce some of my control freak nature and able to give people tasks and not worry about it so much. It's important to have a team that you trust. So we don't have anybody who's, especially in the software side, who's a junior developer or anything. And that's actually another, I think, really important piece of advice. If you're gonna hire someone to write code for you, you're better off really getting somebody senior and experienced when you're this small.
Right.
Right off the bat, rather than thinking, oh, I can get 2 junior developers, and that's the same as 1 senior developer. It's no, you really need somebody who's really really experienced. So everybody in our team is really good. I can hand things off to them and expect it'll be done correctly.
And so you mentioned your first vertical is education.
Yeah.
But this overall concept, tell me about your vision for the future.
I think it's the greatest thing ever. I didn't really appreciate it when we started, because we really did start it as a software tool for training counseling skills, because that's my co-founder's expertise. He's worked in academia for 30 years studying that. What makes somebody who's really good at counseling different from someone who's average? So we've taken all of his tools and research and put them in a software form so that we can train people in those skills using our software. And then we discovered that a lot of skills that counselors have that are very useful for their job turn out to be the same skills that anybody could use. So if you want to be a better spouse, for example, and you study, what do couples counselors do, and how do they help people engage and keep their marriage, afloat and not getting divorced and all this, you find that the kinds of skills that people learn that help them in their marriage are very similar to counseling skills. And then you find that a lot of the same skills also are the skills that the most effective managers have. You find that there are a lot of the same skills that the most effective business teams have. So what started out as this very small niche, and selling to counseling schools is a small niche. It's very small. But those same techniques could actually apply to anyone. So the future, if you will, of our system is something, my vision is something a little bit like Duolingo. So in case anyone doesn't know what Duolingo is, it's a website, probably the most popular language learning website. You can sign up for free, you go to Duolingo, you could choose a language, I want to learn Spanish, and it has all these tools and gamification to get you coming back every day for 20 minutes to practice Spanish. Well, it turns out practicing interpersonal skills run along the same principles. And so the future for us really is to build a tool that will train anybody in all sorts of different interpersonal skills. So it could be used to train managers to be better, effective leaders, people to be better at their marriage. There's an infinite number of things. How we do that, what that looks like, what's the right business model, what's the right technology, architecture. We're figuring that out right now. But I'm really excited about it because I didn't see this at the start. And this is one of those things when you start a company, you don't know what you don't know. You build one little thing and then you can see like a much bigger picture after building the little thing. So
that's awesome.
That's next. Yeah.
Well, let's hear it for Kurt.